Hello everybody, I'm Richard Holder, and where are my turbofans? More specifically, where are my first-timer turbofans? That's right, this video is back to basics. I'm going to show you what happens when we go to the wrecking yard, grab a motor. In this case, it is an LS and also a 4.8 liter, but it works with any motor, whether it's a Ford or Chevy, Dodge, Hemi, I don't care, small block Ford, big block Chevy, whatever you do. Go to the wrecking yard, grab a motor, but now what? What do I have to do to this motor to make it turbo ready? That's right, I'm going to cover all the things that you have to have, all the things that you should have, and then, hey Richard, what are the things that you do when you do a turbo motor? I'm going to cover all that, and also we're actually going to put a turbo on a motor and find out what happens when we turbo our motor. Okay guys, it is time officially to get back to basics. I'm going to show you this is what you want to do if you're trying to run a boosted motor. We're going to take a look at an LS, but as I said, it works with any kind of combination. You could go get a small block Chevy or small block Ford, get all the big blocks, Dodges, Hemis, whatever you want. But this is basically how you do it. So we go into the wrecking yard, grabbed a 4.8 liter, and this is what we end up with. We ran the motor with no accessories. We ran it with a Holley HP management system. The factory system would also do this, provide exactly the same numbers. We normally run them on the engine dyno with long tube headers, and as I said, no accessories, no air inlet, and then we ran headers and open exhaust, an optimized tune. And on the LS, we picked a motor that was a 4.8 liter. You can pick any displacement motor, doesn't matter what you're starting with. I usually recommend for a guy putting something in a street car, bigger is better. Instead of a 4.8, you can get a 5.3, or you can get a 6.0 if you can find those. But I want to show you, even if you select just a 4.8, a smaller displacement motor, when you add boost, you could make a ton of power with these things. So this was our stock motor, 4.8 liter, stock throttle body, intake manifold, stock 706 heads. All we did was put ring gap in this thing, as we do to prepare them all for boost. I also like to put ARP head studs on these things, and we put new MLS gaskets on it. Sometimes I will even, if this were going in a car, I would at least resurface the head and maybe resurface the block, just to make sure that you get good sealing. You want the RA number on the head and the block. You want the surface to be prepped basically for the MLS gasket, and so that way you have good sealing and you don't have to worry about losing a head gasket because it's not mated to the head or the block correctly. So I like to do that on these combinations, especially if I was going to put this in something and actually run it around. But what we do is start off with our just kind of bone stock motor with long tube headers, and on our 4.8, that meant that we made 333 horsepower and 342 foot-pounds of torque. See, we ran this one from 2,000, so the low RPM guys should be happy, all the way out to 6,500. It's not making power. The power is already falling off out at 6,500, but since we were going to run a camshaft in this thing, we wanted to make sure that we showed you, what the gains are. So what we did was install a camshaft. In this case, since we were putting a turbo on it, we did a turbo cam. And here's a pro tip for you. You can put any camshaft in here. It doesn't matter. Any sort of camshaft that you put in here, when you choose your camshaft, choose the camshaft to make the power in the RPM range that you want. Now, honestly, on a 4.8, you're not going to pick a camshaft that's going to make a whole bunch of power down at 2,000 RPM. A camshaft just isn't going to do that on a 4.8. I know that the camshaft guys will tell me, oh, you don't know anything about valve events, but that's not the reality. I've tested hundreds and hundreds of camshafts, and at 2,000 RPM with a camshaft, you're not going to make a big difference in power. But you can make good power, but the point is, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of camshafts that you could put in this combination and have it still work, and it will work great, and it will make lots of power. So choose a camshaft. We chose a Brian Tooley Racing Stage 2 Turbo Cam, which honestly, on a 4.8, would not be my choice. I would pick a Truck Norris or a Torque Cam or something smaller than a Stage 2 Turbo Cam, a Stage 1 at least, and again, something smaller than that. And the reason for that, as you can see on the camshaft, and this is another answer for people. Yes, you can run a turbo cam on an NA motor. It works just fine. It's just a cam. It doesn't know that there's boost or that there's not boost. But we picked up a lot of power. The Stage 2 cam did make a lot more power than the stock one. We were over 400 horsepower, 414 or 15 horsepower. The reason that I wouldn't pick this cam on a 4.8 unless you had planned on, running at the track and running it at high RPM is because of this loss down low. It loses power down below 35 or 3600 RPM. So I like to have a camshaft where we don't have that. So I would rather trade a little bit on the top and have equal or better power down low. Like I said, a Truck Norris cam in here probably would be a better choice. But this is what we use. So you can use any sort of stage 1, stage 2. You can use truck cams. You can use anything you want. Put a camshaft in here. And when you do that, when you put a camshaft in an LS or in most other cars or engines, you're going to want to also upgrade the valve spring. So a valve spring and camshaft are like the two things. Obviously, when we're doing this, because we're going to be adding a turbo in just a second, you need other things too. You're going to need a fuel pump that supplies the power output, that can support the power output that you're running, and also fuel injectors. In our case, we put 80-pound Deca injectors in it. They're inexpensive. They work fairly well, and they work in this power range. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we took our combination, where we're our cammed LS, and then we started adding a cheap turbo. Okay guys, we've taken a look at and see what happens when we install a camshaft on our 4.8 liter. We put the Brian Tooley Racing Stage 2 camshaft in here. What the things I want you to notice, we've got 415 horsepower, 365 foot-pounds of torque, and because that's a 226 cam, which is pretty good size, even though it's a turbo cam, look, we're revving all the way out to 7,000 RPM, still making good power out there. And this is why I think, hey, I probably would pick a little bit smaller camshaft than this, because ultimately the turbo is going to kind of dictate how much power we make. But this camshaft is working, and we're going to see what happens when we add a turbo to this now. And for this combination, I've chosen a 1,000 horsepower turbo, or a turbo capable of supporting 1,000 horsepower. If you want to make less power than that, you're saying, hey Richard, I only want to make 600 or 700 horsepower, then choose a turbo like a GT45 or something smaller that will be better suited for that and give you better response. Because as we see, just like with over camming it, which I think we kind of have done on this 4.8 liter, we have over turboed this thing too. So we picked a 1,000 horsepower turbo for a 4.8. But we're leaning more toward the track side on this thing than anything else. But we'll see, it still works fairly well. So what we did, I chose a 1,000 horsepower turbo, and it's a fairly inexpensive one. It's a Borg Warner S475. It's a T6 S475 from the guys at Summit Racing. This one came, it's all nice and fancy and polished. You can get a satin one as well. They've got a lot of stuff, a lot of different turbos now to choose from. And this one works very well. We've run this up near 1,000 horsepower on other applications, and it's definitely capable of doing that. The T6, again, probably wouldn't be my ideal choice for a little 4.8. But this is also what happens. It shows what happens in the real world, because lots of times guys make mistakes. They overcam it, put a small motor in it, put too big of a turbo, and in this case, probably too big of a hot side. But let's see how it turns out on the 4.8. So we added our S475 from Summit Racing. We also added an intercooler in our case, because to make it facilitate making, cooling the charge air on the dyno, making it all fit and making it easy to hook up. We installed an air to water. This one was from ProCharger. Honestly, an air to air mounted in the front of your radiator would work equally well at the kind of boost levels that we're talking about here. And as I said, we already had 80-pound Deca injectors, and our dyno is supplied with a gigantic fuel pump capable of supporting any sort of power level we could ever get to. So we had an air motive brushless pump, and we had lots of fuel flow. But you're going to make sure you're going to need a fuel pump in your car or truck to support your power level to go along with this. Now, when we were running boost, we're running E85, so you need to have even more flow, which has kind of stopped us where we stopped at this power level. But let's take a look and see what happened on our turbo kit. We ran stock factory exhaust manifolds. I certainly turned them around. I made a custom Y-pipe. The Y-pipe consisted of 2 Turbo Smart wastegates, and then obviously merged together to go into. Now I ended my V-band or ended my Y-pipe in a 3-inch V-band flange, and then what I did to facilitate running this up on the dyno is I made adapters to go from the 3-inch V-band to a T3 to a T4 to a T6. I could put any kind of turbo on there I want. So we had a 4.5-inch exhaust coming out of the Summit Racing turbo. That's another thing to consider. Do you have room to fit a gigantic exhaust on there? The bigger the exhaust that you can put on that coming out of the turbo, the better off the turbo will be. It will make a lot more power that way. But let's jump right in and see what happens when we added our turbo. This is our S475 at just a little over 9 pounds, 9.3 or so. Power jumped up quite a bit to 622 horsepower, and peak torque was up to 533 foot-pounds of torque. As you can see, I'm going to go ahead and move me over here up in the corner so we can see a little bit better. Turbo still carrying out, over 600 horsepower for quite a ways, and you can see you could continue to rev this thing out because the power curve is basically flat. So if you wanted to take this thing to 7,500, the spring upgrade that we put on here from Brian Tooley Racing, we use a dual spring, and then with this camshaft and a 4.8, even with the long runner truck manifold, you could continue to rev this thing out and make power if you wanted to go out to 7,500. Again, big turbo, big camshaft, little motor, they're going to want to rev, and you could safely rev this thing out that far. But obviously we didn't stop there. So if 9 pounds is good, then obviously a little more is going to be better. So when we add, this is like 11 pounds, just makes more, more power everywhere. This right here illustrates the beauty of a turbo because you just add boost and it makes more power. It's kind of awesome. So we are up at 670 horsepower and an even 600 foot-pounds of torque. And again, we didn't really stop there. 13 pounds, so we're up over 700 horsepower now. And again, the power curve just kind of carrying flat now. 709 horsepower. Peak torque is up to 648 foot-pounds of torque. And the nice thing about this is this will just continue to do this. We have enough turbo. We stopped running here because we were getting pretty high up on the duty cycle with our E85. 80-pound injectors won't take you to 1,000. They will take you to 1,000 horsepower on gas or near there, but they will not take you to 1,000 horsepower when you have E85 because you've got to flow another 25% or so more fuel. So we stopped here, but as you can see, it works. I mean, an S475 turbo, a 4.8 liter, a cammed 4.8 liter, no matter what you put in there, this turbo will support this kind of power level, and obviously it will keep going all the way up to pretty close to 1,000 horsepower. And that's the beauty of going to the wrecking yard and putting a turbo on a Junkyard LS with a cam. Remember, turbo, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. And remember, this works with any motor.